Oh man, it's time for another episode of No Label Live, the show all about labels and how they can be your biggest adversity or your biggest advantage. The choice is yours. Each week we bring on inspiring guests to share their story about how labels have impacted their life and the work that they do. So let's strap in and join this conversation. Hey guys, we are diving in to today's episode, today's conversation with author, speaker, sociologist Isabel Hundt. Isabel, how are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about the conversation and I'm doing pretty well beside the gloomy and weary weather.
Yeah. So I know we're in different parts of the country, but it's a gloomy day here as well. But I
Yeah.
think with our conversation today, we are going to brighten that up with what we're talking about.
Yes.
Um, so anybody watching or listening knows that I am Mr. No Labels guy, and I am all about connection, and that's what we are diving into today. So, Isabel, can you tell me what got you involved and so passionate about the world of connection and the world of labels?
Yes. Um, it started very, very young. I grew up in East Germany, so that was behind the wall. So I always felt kind of separated from everyone else. It was just a different world. When you're in it, it just feels like you're on a different continent even. It's like it's a very interesting experience. And then when the wall came down, everything just opened up, and it was just this feeling of freedom. And I always wondered why I wasn't able to experience that before, because as a child, you're not really paying attention to borders. You just live within your family dynamic, right? And I noticed that already as a child, I was able to feel into the collective energy. So if a nation or a country feels a certain way, I can feel that. It's just a very, very strong experience. And growing up, my dad studied social work. So I kind of studied that with him. I was always interested in how our mind works and how we are all connected. And it was just really fascinating for me. So at the age of 12, I read his college books. And over time, I just really started to watch, to really observe different people. In Europe, that's not really that hard because you have different countries pretty close to you. We just lived 30 minutes from Czech Republic. I mean, there's Poland, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, France. They're all around. So it's quite easy to just observe how people respond differently to each other, where there are certain things going on. So, for example, parts of France just don't like Germans. If you go there, there's no personal interaction with them, or there's no relationship with any of them. And you can feel how they just have this wall up and how they start to hate on you and don't talk to you in English, because if you don't speak French, they don't talk to you at all. And it was really interesting for me. And I wanted to know more. Why is that? Because personally, we have never met. So what is it that has you create that disconnection? And then when I was 18 or 19, I came to the US for the first time to work as a nanny. So in that case, I was the immigrant. And that put me on a totally different side of things. You feel a lot of judgment and prejudice, and Germans have it pretty easy compared to other nations, obviously. They're quite well respected, but then again, when you say you're from Germany, people suddenly talk very slowly and loud. And you're like, excuse me, I'm not deaf. And I do understand what you're saying. If I wouldn't, I would ask you. Or sometimes I'm pretty bold in what I say and quite direct. I don't know. I just don't really think too much. I just say what is. And people always question that, always like, are you sure you meant it this way? And I'm not so sure if you used the right word. I'm like, no, I pretty much know what I just said. And I totally meant it. And there were those stigmas around that. And even as a sociologist, I studied sociology, and it's all about labels and empirical studies and how can we create a better with each other if we put more people in more boxes. And just having that experience myself from living in a different country, I noticed that we've gotten to the point where there are so many labels that define apparently our identity that it doesn't really support our with each other or community, but it actually plays right into our ego and our prejudice and biases. And growing up, I mean, you step into that system and the way people teach, the educational system, and you just believe them. You don't really question it that much because that's how it's always been. This is what your parents told you to do. This is what your teachers told you. So why would you question it? It seems to work. They're still alive. But in that moment, and I think I had to leave the country, my own home country, to really get a distance to all of that and step away from everything I've known so that I can create a different picture, a different view of the world. And I was just like, okay, those labels, everything that we have that we think is supporting us within a community is really destroying us, really deeply on a core level. It feeds our ego, it feeds the understanding of a separation. But then I also noticed that the missing piece every time, no matter where I went in how I observe things in my studies, the missing piece has always been spirituality. Every time I went right back to the topic of spirituality, from the understanding that we are one, that if we wouldn't have the physical matter, if we were just to ignore the physical matter, there would be just energy waves, atomic energy waves, and there are no boundaries. We would just intertwine. You would just operate on different frequencies, right? And I'm like, okay, it is really the spiritual part that is missing in the understanding and how we are connected and how we relate to each other and how we believe in fictitious identities that just make sure that we as individual are special. That's something that I've heard for the first time really in the US, where it's being taught in school when kids come home with another art craft thing that says, you are special.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
always felt icky to me. I was like, no, you're not special. You are unique in your expression of a divine force, but you're not special, because special usually is associated with privileges. And especially in schools, if that is being taught, kids go out and say, well, I'm special, I can do that. I'm like, well, I know you can do that, but not because you're special, but because maybe that's your strength, or you learned that, and it bothered me. But it
And
is, again, that separation where we're really defending our physical matter instead of coming together and understanding that, hey, we are all connected and there's a reason I am because you are. If you are not understanding that, I have a really hard time stepping into my spot, into my calling of my soul's journey at this point in time. And then you just come back and relive it again.
yeah.
And it was just really interesting how everything led back to spirituality, even within science.
And so I took a lot away there. So let me try and unpack what I'm thinking. So I relate completely. I'm not from Germany, but I relate completely to the idea that if people perceive something or assume something about you, that they, for some reason, will slow down and they'll talk really, really loud. Um, because as someone that was born with a disability that
Mhm.
has no intellectual impairment, there's a automatic assumption that
Yeah.
my disability is an intellectual one, and so people will talk that way to me.
Yes. I can, yes, I could totally see that. And I'm sure at one point, without the awareness that I have today, I probably would have had similar biases and prejudice. And it did take me quite some time and really digging deep, and it was painful, it was hurtful. And, I was like, oh man, I feel guilty, or I feel shame around things that I have said or I have done. But in the end, the connection part, really coming together in unity, is about forgiveness. Not just forgiving
Mm,
each other, but also forgiving yourself for, hey, now I do have the awareness. I see where I was coming from or why I responded this way. I am sorry. I forgive myself, and I hope eventually whoever I felt like a superior toward will forgive me as well. I've never I have a gift. It's called synesthesia. So my brain translates everything in color. The mirror
okay.
neurons that we use for empathy translates everything in color. So if it's numbers, letters, even if I just focus or just think of a city, I can see the collective. It just shows up in a different in a color.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized over the years that those colors change according to someone's emotional state. So when I
Yeah.
take a look at people, and I don't just rush by, and in my head, if I pay attention, it's like the heart center that I see the most dominant color usually radiating from that. And then through the psychology of color, it helps me just to say, okay, I don't see you within your physical matter, but I see that your soul is somehow communicating with you that you are supposed to step deeper into the spiritual side of things, or there's something in your life going on where you're not using your voice properly, or you're called
Mm.
to really step into something. But from that place, and I'm not always saying that to them, and I don't tune in deeper.
Yeah.
Usually there are much more messages related to that. I don't do that because that's just not ethically okay. There is a personal space, right?
Uh-huh.
But when I just see the color, I already know, like, okay, I'm not taking this personally, whatever comes from them or whatever the interaction will bring. I would just look at them from a learning experience. Hey, that is where they are at on their soul's journey, and that is okay. In which ways can I come along and support them? Even if someone is angry at me, I can ask reflective questions instead of buying into it and reacting towards their anger with anger myself. I'm not saying that I'm perfect at that. There are days where I do that too, but then I have to evaluate that for myself and say, okay, so why did that just trigger me? Why did anger come up for me? So where are things that I have to move? Where
Yeah.
did I not respect my own boundaries? But it's just a different way of being with people. It just helps you see more of their soul than what they perceive as their identity. And again, that they're trying to defend publicly, because we all want to be in some way special, but at the same time belong. And it's just a
Mhm.
oxymoron where you're like, okay, you need to figure this out. You have the knowing and the understanding that you are a unique expression of a divine force, of God, universe, whatever you want to call it. I always leave that open to people. Yet you are on your own unique soul's journey. And wherever you're finding yourself, the people that are with are either your teachers, your friends, your guides, or your lessons.
Mm.
And if you
Okay.
can perceive them this way, you start to respect them more.
Yeah.
And one story that we're basing our documentary on, that we're currently working on, it's called The Power of Connection, Changing the World by Changing Your Perception. It's based on a story. When I first came to the US, I went on a few dates with a guy that was Black. And growing up in Germany, especially East Germany, was under communism. You don't have that much variety. You pretty much to see your neighbors. You can't travel that much. You are where you're at, right?
Mhm.
And so even though I felt really drawn to him and really enjoyed being with him, there was my head that made up stories from what
Yeah.
I've seen on TV, they probably belong to a gang. They're violent. He's probably having a gun with him. Who knows what he wants from me? And none of that is true or was ever true. But it was just my thoughts from what I have been taught, the programming that I had bought into, that determined in that very moment how I was relating to him and how I let this relationship unfold. It never went anywhere. We're still friends. But I determined, or I let other people, everything that I've been taught, everything that I've seen, determine who I connect with and who I can and am allowed to connect with. And just because he looked differently, I already created the separation just through the biases that I had about the box of black.
And we wonder why the epidemic of loneliness is growing at the rate that it's growing.
Yes.
I mean, that's the one thing that I believe stems everything that's creating that is we have our boxes, and our boxes or our labels are creating the loneliness because we can only see within our boxes, and so that can be very isolating.
Yes. Two sides. There are two sides that I see. I actually see the opportunity in what we're seeing evolving. And again, also the other side, what you've just mentioned, the opportunity that comes with loneliness could be the lesson in, are you capable of being with yourself? So that you can go deeper within and understand more of the different rooms within your subconscious, and evaluating and really taking doing an inventory of your beliefs, and do they really fit in with what your heart and your soul is communicating with you? Because most of the time we cannot do that if we're constantly distracted, if we go partying and just hanging out with people just to numb ourselves, to not to have to deal with any of those thoughts. So there is an opportunity within the epidemic of loneliness. Maybe it is not the epidemic of loneliness, but an epidemic of being called to be by yourself so that you can do the discovery of who you actually are. So I think there is the opportunity for those who can see that and then can be okay with being by themselves yet not feeling lonely, because even if we're physically on our own, it doesn't take away from the truth that we're still all connected. Even if you're sitting in your room, every thought that you have, every action that you do, even with your door closed, has a ripple effect. If it's to your neighbors, you know that, if you live in an apartment complex and you have never really met your neighbors, but you have this feeling every time you walk by a specific apartment, like, oh, that just feels really weird. That feels icky. There must be something going on in there. That alone, I mean, I know I'm not alone at that people experience it. Like, you kind of know, even if you haven't seen that neighbor before, right?
Yeah.
That alone is proof that we do impact each other, even if we are behind closed doors. So I think that is an understanding that we are never actually alone, yet we're called to sometimes withdraw and be okay to be by ourselves without feeling lonely. And so there's the opportunity in what we're seeing now, if you're aware of it. And then again, there's also the isolation that may come with, okay, I feel weird, something doesn't align, everything is just too much, overwhelm, frustration. If it comes with technology, if it comes with food that we eat, chemicals that are being sprayed around, that is an absolute overstimulation of your nervous system. And that's when people feel there's something wrong with me. And if there's something wrong with me, I need to go hide out, or I just withdraw because I don't fit in. Who knows what people say about me if I share some of that. And that is the danger of that epidemic. So there are those sides that could give you hope, and the other one that's based on hopelessness. And I think something that we want to do with the documentary in particular is to say, hey, people, let's do this work together. We can reflect things back to each other without that judgment, like, hey, I just realized you said that, and I personally take responsibility for how it made me feel. However, have you thought about this? Or what is really going on in yourself? I do that with my 6-year-old, and it works really well. He is very well aware of what he needs. And sometimes it is that very simple question when people even act out or are aggressive, then the question to ask, hey, what do you need? It usually takes the wind out of someone's sail.
Yeah.
Wait a second, I'm angry at you. You should be angry at me. So how can you show sympathy right now?
Yeah, you're like, I want you to mirror my emotions back to me.
That's right.
Absolutely. I think it's so interesting. Like, going back to when you were talking about the anger piece, I think a lot of times we don't necessarily have the awareness that to ask ourselves, okay, because I think it comes from a place of you're in your fight or flight mode,
Mm-hmm.
and so you're just scared, and that anger is a response to something that you're scared of, and we don't really take the time to be like, hey, what am I really scared of here? No, I'm just going to yell at you because it's what's naturally coming to me, and it's what I've seen everybody else do. I'm not going to question why this is coming up.
Yeah. Well, there is a spiritual meaning behind everything we experience emotionally. I call our emotions the guardians of our soul. We created a really cool animation and illustration for the documentary where we use our emotions as avatars, just for people to recreate and reevaluate their relationship to their emotions instead of seeing them as bad or something. Oh my gosh, now I feel this or I feel that. And you're really fighting yourself in that moment. And it creates a lot of frustration and overwhelm. So within the documentary, we want to invite people to overthink and rethink their relationship to emotions. So we turn them into more personal avatars. Like it's beautiful how the illustrator really did it. I love it. And how they are standing between your ego and your soul. And whenever your ego gets to the point of, hey, we need to make sure we're totally separated, we are special, and we need to defend our identity, right? Our emotions reflect that back in a way that say, hey, you went a little bit out of alignment with your soul, which your soul is an absolute expression of love. And everything that is not in alignment with the understanding of unconditional love will bring up different emotions. And so anger is in general about boundaries. And the spiritual meaning of anger is about what are personal boundaries within I can exist in a way that I feel safe. And sometimes when you grow through personal development, for example, we forget to reset our boundaries, not just within our physical space, but especially within our mental and emotional space. And for example, my dog, she is a female dog. We've had her for 4 years now. And in the very beginning, when we had her, she would make me angry and I didn't know why. Like she was just like, oh, can I just give you back? I don't want you here. Now she's very attached to me. But I had to look at myself, I'm like, why is she making me so angry? And I know why, because she was all about play. She was all about taking care of herself. She made sure that we knew what her needs are. If it's water, if it's going to poop, And I didn't do that for myself. I just went go, 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 go. And she reflected that back to me. And it made me angry about her because she reflected something back to me that I didn't want to do because I thought I had to just move and hustle and get things done, right? And that was a really good reflection of me. And every time I get angry at her now, it's a sign for me that I need to step back. I need to find something that rejuvenates me. Maybe I just need to go for a walk, or maybe I just need a nap. And I just look at myself, hey, what do I need in this moment? Why did she trigger me? Sadness and grief, also very spiritual, emotional vibrations that go deep. We call it the river of the soul. And when people experience that, it is about letting go of things, even if it's something as I need to let go of stuff because it just is all cluttered. It can create sadness and grief because some of that has sentimental value, right? Or when we do lose a person, our physical understanding, the human understanding, thinks they are gone. But if we really tap into the spiritual understanding of someone leaving their physical body, they're not gone. Like, where is energy supposed to go? It's just the physical that is not there anymore, that bounds them to this 3D world. And that has helped me so many times just to know this, to not drown in sadness or grief. But when I let my ego get in, and that wants to make sure, hey, we're all separate, you just lost something that was part of your identity, then I would drown. Then it would be really hard, maybe even fall into depression. And it just keeps going like that's with pretty much every emotion. And if we don't quite know that and understand that, we are prone to just reacting, and that does take away the connection, the soul connection that we have with other people.
Yeah. I remember, since we met each other at Summit of Greatness, I remember this last time, one of the intentions I made was that I wanted to walk away from every opportunity to connect with somebody and know that they felt seen and they felt heard. And it completely shifted my experience this time around, because I was able to, like, I wasn't focused on me. I was focused on how do we connect to each other and just be with each other without any expectation. And it's like one of those things, like right now I feel a lot of energy coming from this conversation with you, and it's like radiating from my body. But what do you think, when I say things that I know about people is we want to be seen and we want to be heard, how has that shown up in the work that you do, if it has?
A lot of people who really do, again, there are two sides as well.
Yeah.
Do we really want to be seen? Do we really want to be heard? Or do you just want us to hear your opinion? Do you just want us to validate your fictitious identity? So there are deep questions to ask, because a lot of people say, I just want to be seen and want to be heard. But when you do, especially with the gift that I have, that there are many people that just run away. I never hear back from them ever again. I had so many conversations, and then they ask like, hey, what color do you see on me? I'm like, well, are you sure you want to know? And then I usually tell them, it's like, well, it's just like a piece of clothing, and this is the color, and this is the general meaning. I don't memorize them on purpose, so I don't just push it on them like, oh, everything you told me would just reflect this color. So I really can stay true to what I really see.
Yeah.
But that is when people feel really seen. And then, how do you know that? I'm like, you're radiating that from you. Like, I'm not knowing that because I get into your head. You're radiating that out from you. And I just can be with you to the point where I can hear it. It's like, I can feel what is going on and what you may need in that moment, but it scares people. And then you never hear from them again. I lost many friends because of that. I saw them too much. They couldn't hide behind the wall anymore. That made them feel safe. They didn't feel safe in that moment. So the question is, do we really want to be seen? Do we really want to be heard? Or do we only want to be seen and heard when it's in alignment with what our ego identifies as this is us?
With our label, our identity.
Yes.
Yeah. And oh man, that brings me back to like so many times that I've had that. Like I wasn't thinking on this level at that point, but I can relate to that so much where people are like, okay, you
Yeah.
can stop now. And it's
It's when you do take the time and you just be with people. You hear it so many times where people say, you don't understand me as long as you haven't walked in my shoes. And I'm like, I don't have to walk in your shoes. Those are your shoes. Even if I were to walk your shoes, they still would fit differently on my feet than they do on your feet.
mm,
I am not here to walk your soul's journey. That is yours to determine why you chose this life at this time and why you experience certain things that you do. But I'm more than happy to put on my shoes and walk with you and help you just to reflect some things back, and you can reflect things back to me because we're in it together. But I'm not walking in your shoes. And
mm,
people want that kind of sympathy. But that is a victim mindset. You don't know how I feel. Well, if you're not telling me, I definitely won't know. And maybe if I cannot relate to it because I've never been in that situation, I don't even have to. I just have to acknowledge what your experience is in that moment and take it seriously and say, hey, what can I do to help you experience that differently? That's all there is for us to do. But so many people bring up those topics, especially within minority groups. And I know that because I am part of a minority group considered immigrants.
mm,
And there are a lot of disadvantages. But like, for example, okay, here's a good example. When I first came to the US and I put myself in situations that could have ended up awkward or embarrassing, I always said, well, English isn't my first language. I used that as an excuse. I wanted people to acknowledge that for me, but that was coming from a victim mindset. Or even for me to say, well, obviously as an immigrant, I have all those disadvantages. I can't do all of that. Well, have I tried to change any of that?
mm,
Maybe not. Maybe there are reasons why I didn't change that. There are things that need to come to the surface that we have to talk about, that we have to say, okay, this is what's going on. We need to break up that system, that programming. But if we dwell in it and consciously hold on to that label, it's like this internal war that we can never win. We want to fight against it. We want people to understand that we don't want that label, but really we're holding on to it because it does make us feel somewhat special and
mm-hmm.
different, and it gives us a ground to fight on.
Yeah, and I had another guest. He said about excuses one time. He says excuses are very dangerous, and they're very dangerous because they're valid in the mind of the excuse maker. And I was
Very
like,
true. You will always
spot
find
on.
confirmation. You
Yeah.
will always find confirmation as of this being true, whatever you believe to be true about yourself. It's when you have a good day and you look in the mirror, you find all the things that look great about you. Oh, my hair looks really good today. You might look this exact same way the next day, but because you're in a bad mood, I'm like, oh, it looks horrible. And nothing has changed. If you were to take a picture, it would still be the same.
Mm-hmm.
But that just shows how our perception, how we try to validate whatever we experience. And if we really wanted to break up some of the social challenges that we experience, we would have to become much more honest with ourselves, because a lot of times what we have become very passionate about and fight for, we don't want to let go because it takes away our purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we fought for so long that became our calling, our purpose, our identity. Do we really want to find a solution? No, because then I don't have anything to fight for anymore. But that is when we talk about bringing God's kingdom to this earth. That is exactly what we're talking about. The freedom of simply being and expressing true love. That's all there is for us to do in the end. But again, our ego is holding on to so many things that we fight for, that we, even if it's a good cause, if it's validated, if it makes sense. But there's always those extremes, like you're always going from one to the next. And subconsciously, there's just a lot going on that we have to become aware of. And so maybe the epidemic of loneliness is a good thing, an invitation for us to go to those places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right on board with that, the two sides of that, because it's the capacity that you have to create connection is really what loneliness is. I think calling you to figure out, and like you said, you have to figure it out for yourself before you need to even worry about somebody else. So I've got a couple more questions. First, if I got off this conversation and I didn't ask this question, I feel like I would rob myself and rob the people watching. So, can you see the energy
Around you?
in this conversation? Yeah.
Around the conversation as a collective, or you?
Let's just say me.
Okay. Okay, so the dominant color that I currently see, again, it can change any minute because of your emotional state, is yellow. And yellow is about the connection between the heart and the mind, and it also the color of leadership. So I think in general, what that may mean for you, and again, I'm not tuning in with you or going any deeper, but what that may mean is your soul saying, hey, I want you to trust your heart a little bit more and create the connection between your mind and your heart and follow more of the guidance that comes from within by stepping into a bigger space of leadership in the way you experience the world.
Hey, I can get behind that. That's when I went through emotional intelligence training, that was the one thing that kept coming up for multiple people was my heart, right? Like, and if you know anything about Enneagram, I'm a 3. So I'm really about the achiever, the motivator, and that's one of the things that's the battle between the mind and the heart.
Yes, so I don't quite believe into all the personality test thing, because no matter, every time I redo that, it comes out with a different result, because I develop and I become more one with a divine force, like the understanding and the deep knowing from a heart level. So it never really is the same ever. But it is great to know in the moment, especially for you too. And now with that reflection, it's like, hey, I am called to trust more into the flow of life and just let life happen for me in ways that serve my journey the most and at its highest good, as well as serving within the capacity of the highest good. So that's good. Yeah.
And so with your documentary, how can people get connected and how can they support?
Yes, we're right now in the fundraising stages, because even though I have an incredible team behind me who most of them volunteer their services, but our goal is to have it done by the summer, because if I take a look at the energy, the collective energy until the summer, it needs to, like, every time when I meditate, I hear it, you cannot delay it, you cannot delay it. And so we need animators and illustrators right now to help us work on that. And so we do need some funding. And if anyone is interested in checking it out, like what it is all about, the trailer, we have that done. Yay. And I think it came out really well. I love it. You can go to thepowerofconnection.net. Thepowerofconnection.net.
And we'll make sure and drop it in there.
Yes, that I would love that. I would really appreciate that. So there you can find the trailer, you can find what it is about, you can find the link if you're really interested in supporting it financially, like even if it's $5, if it's $2, anything helps at that point within the development. That would be much, much appreciated by me and by the team.
Yeah, and I've seen the trailer. If you haven't seen it, make sure and go check it out. It's an amazing thing. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh man, this has the potential to be really, really big. The final question I've got for you here today is, what does no label defines me mean to you?
The first thing that came to mind was freedom. If we can strip ourselves from the humanly understanding of putting all those labels on us so we feel safe, if we strip that away, there is a sense of freedom and a sense of self-expression. And usually what that looks like, and we're not talking about being authentically you, because authentically you would mean in that very moment that you're always coming from a place of love. At least you choose to come from a place of love until some of your ego comes back in. But in general, no label for me means freedom and love.
Freedom and love. LOVE, for sure. Is there anything before we hop off that you want to leave the viewer or the listener with today?
Yes, a word of encouragement. If you do feel like you're being labeled, or you feel like, okay, there's something wrong with me, just know that there is not. But whatever you're experiencing right now is part of your journey. And for you, it is the responsibility to ask, what is it that I need to learn from this? What is it that I need to take away from this? But also, what do I need in that very moment? And how can I trust more in what is life offering for me without the feeling of I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me, or just because I'm born a certain way, I don't fit in. Because really, nobody can fight that. We're all connected. You cannot fight that, no matter how much you try.
Yeah.
So you're never really alone or never good enough. You're here for a reason.
Yeah. And that ultimately is the one box that we all fit in, is the human being box.
Yes, or even, I don't know, even as human beings, I mean, there's still separation between animals and nature, you know, there's still a category.
Yeah.
If we really were to go all the way down there, it's only the soul level. The tree in front of you would be as much your brother as your physical human brother would be.
All right. And we will leave it there. Thanks so much for joining. If you got something out of this conversation today, make sure and share it. Make sure and go check out the link for the documentary. Check out the trailer. And if you know somebody who would be a good fit for the conversations we have on No Label Live, send them my way and share this with somebody you care about today. With that, you can catch us next week. Hey, No Label Live fam, what is going on? Thanks so much for checking out this week's episode of No Label Live. And I wanted to let you know that in the description below, there's a link to a new survey that I'm doing to help understand how loneliness has impacted your life and how we can work together to create more connection and create what you want out of life. So if you take 2 minutes, it's like 7 questions, and fill it out, I will be able to support you greater as a leader and help you create more of what you want in your life. I appreciate you, and remember, you're up to big things. And when you're up to big things, you must be patient, you must be diligent, and you must never, never quit.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of No Label Live. If you enjoyed it, make sure and share it with a friend and tag me. Let me know your thoughts on the episode. Connect with me on YouTube and Instagram at _Nathan_Todd. And make sure and let a friend know that they are more than their label. They matter, and they are one step away from their success. And remember, my friend, you're up to big things. And when you're up to big things, you must be patient, you must be diligent, and you must never, never quit. And you can catch new episodes of No Label Live here every Friday.